Hey everyone, welcome to another Piney podcast. Oh, I'm Tony D, and this is my dog Joan. Today we're talking about the basics of the Jersey Devil. I could do probably 10 podcasts on the Jersey Devil, but we're just going to do a basic one, just sort of get you familiar with the legend if you're not familiar with the Jersey Devil legend. The Jersey Devil is kind of like New Jersey's Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. The basic story goes, and there's many different versions of the story. There was a woman in 1732 who lived in South Jersey in the Pine Barrens named Mother Leeds. And she was born the 13th child and had 13 children. And on a blustery night in the Pine Barrens when she was giving birth, she couldn't take it anymore, and she said, "Let the devil take it," meaning her baby. And the devil her baby turned into the Jersey Devil. It grew to monstrous size, ate the family, flew up the chimney, and has been haunting the Pine Barrens ever since. Now that's kind of the basic story, and then there's many variations of the story over the years. So the early sort of 1700s Jersey Devil was always very much associated with the devil as in Satan, as in hell. You know, it had those religious overtones. And if you'll take a quick peek at my collection of illustrations of the Jersey Devil, you can see how people sort of viewed it at that time. So we're going to take a quick look. Okay, here you could see probably the most old school Jersey Devil design. This is the famous Ed Sheets illustration. It's on a lot of postcards you could find in Smithville. And it's sort of like the Jersey Devil as the devil. And there's another version here. This is the kind of old school devil that would, buy your soul, that kind of thing. This is very old school. This is like 1700s Jersey Devil. And then, as you can see from this illustration, this is more of a dragon illustration. This is more 1800s. This is a Batstow, New Jersey postcard with the Jersey Devil. And if you can see the poster in my office, this has got some of the famous Jersey Devil illustrations as well, including that dragon one from Batstow. And these are more late 1800s, early 1900s illustrations, with the Jersey Devil being like a monster that lives in the woods, half horse, half deer, you can see in the left there. And there were different kinds of illustrations over the years. Okay, now we're back. And this is issue 10 of Jersey Devil, my comic. And it's all about Norman Jeffries and the 1909 incident. This isn't actually Norman on the cover. This is supposed to be me being a huckster like Norman in an homage to Norman and what happens in the comic. And it's based on a true story. So what happened was Norman Jeffries, after he read about the Jersey Devil in a bookstore, I haven't been able to figure out what book he would have read the Jersey Devil legend in. I suspect, well, it's definitely not the red book you may be familiar with, which is called The Jersey Devil by McCloy and Miller, because that one didn't come out until, I think, the mid-60s. So it was definitely something older. I do have a book from the late 1800s that literally has every single crazy legend, and I believe the Jersey Devil's in that one too. So maybe it was that one. No one's really sure. But anyhow, once Norman read the story, he decided what he would do was exploit it and use it for the Dime Museum. So he went to one of his cronies. He wrote this letter, and he told one of his cronies to go to South Jersey and mail it to the newspaper. Now you have to understand the context. In 1909, no cars, no TVs, no radio. So newspapers were the #1 communication and the quickest communication at that time, other than talking to somebody. So when his crony sent this letter was a made-up letter from a farmer's wife saying, "Oh, my husband went out to the barn and was attacked by the Jersey Devil, and it was terrible, it was atrocious." And she describes the devil, and it flies off into the woods. So it was a slow news day. The editors in Philly, typically they look down upon farm folk, and they called people in South Jersey, as you know, the Pineys. Bunch of Pineys. That was a derogatory term. It meant you were some uneducated nobody that didn't deserve the time of day. And so these elitists exploited that. They laughed about it, and they said, "Sure, let's post this Piney's letter in the newspaper," and they did. Well, the slow news day, everybody picked up on it, and it was big news. Everybody was reading about it, like, oh crap, the Jersey Devil was sighted. And after that, everybody started seeing it. But were they really seeing it? Well, at the time, this is one of the incidents, there were a lot of trolleys, and a group of passengers claimed to have seen the Jersey Devil fly off the tracks and fly up into some wires and explode. Well, during that era, trolleys, first off, electricity was very new and very sort of raw. So, if you were on a trolley, it was running on some wires which were full of electricity, and there were cranes that lived in New Jersey at that time, pretty decent sized ones. It's likely a crane flew up into the wires and exploded because it got hit by a giant bolt of electricity, and boom, fricasseed crane. And it may also be possible that the newspaper editors at the time just wanted to milk it for money, as a lot of newspaper people do today. So who knows what really happened. Another incident, and we talk about these incidents in the comic, there was a police chief that thought he saw it and shot at it in Camden. There was also a guy who was casing houses to rob them. But since no one had cars, everybody used horses, and it was winter of 1909. There was a lot of snow on the ground, so he couldn't just case people's houses, because you have to understand, this was a time when if I went to your house in winter, I would leave footprints in the snow, and you would probably notice them if you came outside, because you're not sitting inside watching TV. This is a time where people go outside and they do stuff. Even in the winter, they do chores because you have to. You can't just go to the supermarket or whatever. So leaving footprints around somebody's house, yeah, they're going to see them. So what he did was he took some boards and he nailed horseshoes to the bottom of them, and he tied them to his feet. So all he would leave would be horseshoe prints, which worked for a while. But the thing was, everybody got hyped up about the Jersey Devil. So they were super paranoid, and they were looking at things twice. And they noticed that the footprints he left behind were horseshoes, something with cloven feet, but only with 2 legs. And people could notice that because they were used to seeing horse tracks in the snow. So they could tell the difference between horse tracks and a guy who just was using 2 horseshoes to walk around. But they didn't interpret it that way. They interpreted that, oh my God, these are the cloven feet of the devil. He was looking into my house. He wants to kill me. So people went nuts when they saw this. And so the reports are just spiraling out of control. They're forming militias to fight it. There are people weighing in from every walk of life, saying what they're going to do if they see the Jersey Devil, or what they think it is. One scientist said it was a giant germ that had flown down from Mars. It was nuts. So Norman starts to get paranoid that he's unleashed a monster. But he has a plan, and his plan is to capture the Jersey Devil. And so he stages a capture in Fairmount Park by renting a kangaroo, which he has painted green and has antlers tied to his head. The kangaroo licks off all the paint and then nearly dies, but manages to survive. They stage the capture, and you could actually, if you go back in the archives, you can actually see the picture of Norman and his cronies standing next to the kangaroo. And, it was big news at the time. Jersey Devil captured. Oh, everybody can sleep at night now. So then Norman displayed the kangaroo at the Dime Street Museum. And remember, this is 1909, so he had a kid. He had a curtain in front of the cage and another curtain behind the cage. Behind that curtain was a kid with a board with a nail in it. And the kid would hit the poor kangaroo, and then Norman would open the curtain. The kangaroo would go berserk, the audience would get scared, they'd close the curtain, and then they'd bring in the next crowd. And that's how they made their money at the Dime Street Museum for a while. Wasn't enough to save it. Eventually it closed anyway. Norman tried a second act. He staged this wedding between this deformed dwarf who he bought from a circus. And apparently the dwarf wasn't, you know, he had a lot of problems. He wasn't mentally competent. You know, that was something they did for circus shows back then. Wasn't nice. I don't condone it, but what are you gonna do? It's history. So Norman staged that a millionaire heiress had fallen in love with the dwarf and married him. And so he staged the wedding, and he had more things going on at the Dime Street Museum, but it didn't help him because eventually the Dime Street Museum closed anyway. It was on 9th and Arch, or 9th and Race. I think it was Race. So, you know, it's not there anymore. The building's long gone. But if you go back and do some research, you can actually see a picture of it. There's a couple of pictures of it from that era. And then finally, about 15 years after this, Norman eventually gave an interview explaining he had, you know, set up the whole thing, and it was a whole big article in the Philadelphia Tribune, which was kind of interesting. You know, Norman was just like, yeah, I did it. You know, he wasn't arrested or anything. People weren't mad. Nobody got hurt, I don't think, except maybe the kangaroo. So that 1909 incident really set the stage for the modern Jersey Devil legend, and that's kind of what we get now. Like, it's a monster. It runs around. Maybe it's green and it's got horns on its head because the kangaroo had antlers tied to its head. And so there's, you know, in pop culture, people have used it in comics and cartoons. The X-Files had a Jersey Devil episode. You know, whenever you get these sort of cryptozoology type TV shows or websites, the Jersey Devil's in the mix. He's not the biggest, but he's definitely in the mix. The hockey team mascot is the Jersey Devils. The official state demon of New Jersey, Jersey Devil. We're the only state with its own official state demon. So that's the basics on the Jersey Devil. And if you want to see the Jersey Devil yourself, well, you can go to Leeds Point, New Jersey, and right next door Smithville, where all the touristy stuff is. You can get a t-shirt and a postcard like I've shown you, or posters or whatever. Don't go too crazy, because the locals don't like it when people show up, tourists show up and start wandering around the woods looking for Mother Leeds' house. It's not there. They just keep finding more abandoned shacks and claiming, that's the house, and then slowly tourists take pieces of it and falls apart, and then a few years later they pick another house. There's been like 4 or 5 houses over the years, and it just ends up, the locals are sort of wary to really push the Jersey Devil legend too hard, because it attracts people who just wander around in the woods looking for it, and I don't really understand what they expect to see. It's like let's go look for a monster that might kill us. If the monster existed, that would be really stupid. And if it doesn't exist, well, you're kind of wasting your time. You know, back when I was doing the Jersey Devil comic book pretty hardcore, I tried to, you know, push for more advertising for the legend, maybe get a guy in a suit and do a tour, but the locals really don't want that. They don't want to push it that hard. They're fine with the bumper stickers and t-shirts, and that's about as far as they're gonna go, you know. They got drinks and wine named after the Jersey Devil. It's just a fun little thing, and there are tons of Leeds descendants who live in the area. The Leeds family was huge in New Jersey, especially in the mid to early 1700s. They owned basically all of South Jersey, and the real origin of the legend is probably that one of the Leeds family had a child that was probably mentally incompetent, and this is 1732. They didn't really know how to deal with someone like that if they were, especially if they were an extreme case. So, they would say, well, he's touched by the devil. That would have been their explanation. They probably would have just locked the poor kid up and thrown him fish heads or whatever. And eventually, servants would have leaked stuff about what was going on at the Leeds house, and it would be, ooh, that's not good. The Leeds must have done something terrible for God to do this to them, and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where the legend starts. But ironically now, all the Leeds descendants will proudly tell you, oh, I'm related to the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil's part of my family, and which is funny, And anybody who lives in South Jersey here, if you're not related to the Leeds and the Jersey Devil, or the Leeds Devil as they sometimes call it, you typically see the short film about the Jersey Devil when you're in grammar school. I did. And it was called Mother Leeds' 13th Child. And I got a copy of it somewhere. It doesn't really hold up. But, you could see it. You can probably find it online. And it gives you the basic story of the Jersey Devil legend. 13th child of a 13th child, or the 6th child of the 6th child of the 6th child. There's often numbers involved. There's so many variations on the Jersey Devil legend. But, basically it's just a fun thing that people in South Jersey kind of like. And so if you go to Leeds Point, please don't bother the locals too much, okay? All right. That is the end of the Piney podcast for today. My name is Tony D. If you would like to get a copy of Jersey Devil number 10 or any of the other Jersey Devil comics, you can contact me at thefixsite.com or at any of my other websites, the Webcomic Factory, where I do my comics, or Super Frat, where I do that comic. You can also find me on Patreon. And my email's on there somewhere. Just email me, and I'll tell you where to send the check. And I can send you some signed copies of the comic if that's what you want. That's it for the Piney Podcast. I'm Tony, and this is Little Joan of Arc. We will see you next time, Piney.